My beloved child. Last night, your soulmate said something about you they had been trying to believe for months. They were sitting with family. Your name came up. Someone asked whether they still thought about you. Your soulmate looked down and said, "Sometimes." Then their older brother replied, "If they really loved you, they wouldn't have left." Your soulmate didn't argue. They had heard that sentence before. From friends. From family. Even from themselves. If they loved you, they would have stayed, and after hearing it enough times, your soulmate had started believing it. They leaned back and whispered, "Maybe they never loved me the way I thought they did." That's when their younger sister, Ava, suddenly stood up. Her expression changed completely. She looked at your soulmate and said, "Stop saying that." The whole room became quiet. Your soulmate frowned. "What?" Ava repeated, "Stop saying they never loved you." Their mother looked confused. "Ava?" But Ava was already walking toward the hallway. She returned carrying an old envelope, placed it on the table, and pushed it toward your soulmate. Your soulmate looked at it. "What is this?" Ava said, "The proof you were never supposed to see." Silence. Your soulmate opened the envelope. The first page was an email. They read the date. Then the subject line. And their face went completely still. It was confirmation that your request to transfer your job to their city had been approved. 2 weeks before the relationship ended. Your soulmate looked up slowly. They were going to move here? Ava nodded. Yes. Nobody spoke. Then your soulmate found another page. An apartment viewing confirmation. Then another. A message you had sent Ava. Your soulmate began reading. And by the second sentence, their hands started shaking. Because you had written, "Please don't tell them yet. I love them, and I'm serious about building a life there. But I need to know they actually want me beside them before I change my whole life." Your soulmate stopped reading. Their eyes filled. Then Ava said, "They didn't leave because they never loved you." Pause. They were preparing to move their entire life closer to yours. And suddenly, everything your soulmate had believed about your ending began to collapse. Before we continue, remember this is an emotional storytelling message, not a literal claim that anyone can know another person's private life. But stay with this story. Because the transfer approval wasn't even the part that hurt your soulmate most. The part that truly broke them was why you canceled it. Months earlier, distance had been one of the hardest parts of your relationship. Not impossible, but hard. You and your soulmate lived far enough apart that seeing each other required planning. Sometimes hours of travel. Sometimes rearranging work. Sometimes one of you arriving tired and still pretending the journey hadn't been difficult. At first, you didn't mind. You were in love. Your soulmate was too. You counted days until seeing each other. You stayed up too late talking. You discussed places you wanted to visit. Food you wanted to try. Things you would do if you lived closer. Your soulmate would joke, if you lived here, you'd probably get tired of me in 2 weeks. You would answer, try me. Then both of you would laugh. But underneath the jokes, you were serious. You wanted the distance to end eventually. Your soulmate did too. At least, that's what they said. One evening you asked, do you ever actually think about us living in the same place? Your soulmate replied, all the time. Your heart lifted. Really? Yes. Then they began describing it. Weekend mornings. Cooking together. Seeing each other without planning days ahead. It sounded beautiful. So eventually, you started looking at what moving might actually require. You didn't tell your soulmate yet. Not because you were trying to create some dramatic surprise. You didn't want to get their hopes up before knowing whether it was possible. Your company had another office near them. So you quietly asked about transferring. You expected the answer to be no. Instead, a manager said, we may have something opening. Suddenly, a hypothetical future became possible. You called Ava, your soulmate's sister. You and Ava had become friendly. Not best friends, but enough that you trusted her. You said, can I ask you something without you telling them? Ava laughed. That depends. You explained the transfer. She became excited immediately. You're serious? Yes. About moving here? If it works. Ava said, they're going to lose their mind. You smiled. Don't tell them. Why? You paused. Then, because I want to know they want a future with me before I build my life around one. That sentence mattered. You weren't asking for marriage. You weren't asking them to guarantee forever. But moving cities was real. Changing jobs was real. Leaving routines, friends, familiar places. Real. You needed to know you weren't doing all of that for someone who still couldn't tell you whether the relationship had direction. A few weeks later, the transfer was approved. You stared at the email for almost 10 minutes. You cried. Happy tears. Scared tears. You called Ava. She screamed. When are you telling them? You said, soon. Ava helped you find apartments. Nothing luxurious. Just possibilities. You booked 2 viewings. Saved neighborhoods. Compared travel times. For the first time, the future felt close enough to touch. But while you were quietly preparing to move closer, something was changing inside your soulmate. They were becoming afraid. Not because they knew about the transfer. They didn't. Because the relationship itself had become more serious. Your soulmate loved you. But commitment had always frightened them. Distance had secretly protected them from some of that fear. Think about it. When you lived apart, there was always a natural limit. A visit ended. You went home. They returned to their normal routine. The relationship was serious, but still contained. As conversations about eventually closing the distance became more real, your soulmate started wondering, what happens when this isn't long distance anymore? What if we live close and fight more? What if they move and regret it? What if I become responsible for their happiness? What if the relationship fails after they've changed their entire life? Those questions weren't unreasonable. But your soulmate didn't share them properly. Instead, they became distant. You noticed immediately. Messages shortened. Plans became harder. You would ask, "Everything okay?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" "I'm just stressed." You believed them at first. Then one night, you brought up the future. Not the transfer. You still wanted that to be your news. You said, "I've been thinking about what happens if we eventually live closer." Your soulmate's expression changed. You saw it. "What?" "Nothing." You smiled nervously. You looked terrified. They laughed. "It's just a big thing." Your excitement dropped slightly. "What is?" "Changing our whole lives around the relationship." You became still. You asked, "Would that be a bad thing?" "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" Your soulmate sighed. "I just don't think either of us should make huge decisions until we're sure." There it was. Sure. That word. You asked, "Sure about what?" "Us." Your heart sank. You kept your voice calm. "Are you not sure about us?" "I love you." "I know." That wasn't the question. Your soulmate continued, "I just don't know what our lives look like years from now." You stared at them. "Neither do I." "Exactly." You tried to understand. Then asked, "Do you want to find out with me?" Your soulmate became quiet. That silence changed everything. Because sitting at home, on your computer, was an email offering you the chance to move closer. An apartment viewing was scheduled. You had already started imagining telling them, "We don't have to miss each other like this anymore," and now, when you asked whether they wanted to find out what the future looked like with you, they couldn't answer. You whispered, "Okay." Your soulmate panicked. "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like I've just ended something." "Have you?" "No." "Then tell me what you're saying." Your soulmate struggled. Finally, "I don't know if I can promise you're part of my long-term plans yet." Your face changed. Completely. Your soulmate saw it. Immediately regretted the wording. "I didn't mean," you interrupted. "No." You looked down. "It's okay." "It isn't." "I said it's okay." But inside, you were thinking about the transfer. The apartments. The conversations with Ava. Everything. You had been preparing to change your life for someone who couldn't tell you whether they saw you inside theirs. That night, you called Ava. She heard your voice and knew something was wrong. What happened? You cried. For several minutes. You couldn't explain. Finally, I can't move. Ava became quiet. What? I can't do it. Why? You told her what your soulmate said. That they loved you. But couldn't promise you were part of their long-term plans. Ava tried, they're scared. I know. They say stupid things when they're scared. I know. Then talk to them. You cried harder. I have. Then, I keep asking for clarity and they keep hearing a demand for certainty. Ava had no answer. You continued, I wasn't going to move there expecting marriage. I wasn't asking them to guarantee forever. Then, but I can't uproot my life just to arrive inside another maybe. That sentence stayed with Ava. She asked, what are you going to do? You looked at the transfer email. Then said, I think I have to cancel it. Ava became emotional. Don't decide tonight. You waited 2 days. Then 3. You tried talking to your soulmate again. You asked, when you say you don't know whether I'm in your long-term plans. Are you asking me to wait? Your soulmate replied, I don't want you waiting for me. Your eyes filled. What does that mean? I don't know. Again. You almost laughed. There it was. Every road leading to the same answer. I don't know. You asked, if I had an opportunity to build a life closer to you tomorrow, would you want me to take it? Your soulmate had no idea how literal the question was. They answered, I wouldn't want you making a major decision because of me. That was it. You nodded. Okay. Your soulmate looked confused. Why are you asking? You almost told them. Almost said, because I already did. Because I applied. Because I got approved. Because I have apartment viewings. Because I have been quietly building the exact future you're afraid to say you want. But something stopped you. You didn't want the transfer to become pressure. You didn't want your soulmate suddenly saying, move here, because they felt guilty. You needed a free answer. And you had received one. So you cancelled the apartment viewings. Then withdrew the transfer. Ava was devastated. She asked, shouldn't they know? You said, no, why? Because I don't want them choosing me because they find out what I was willing to sacrifice. Ava became quiet. You continued, if they want me, I need them to want me before seeing some grand gesture. Then, I don't want my love to become evidence in a trial where they feel forced to give me the verdict I want. So Ava promised. She wouldn't tell. A week later. Your relationship ended. Not because of the transfer. The transfer was simply proof that you had reached a point where love was asking you for real decisions. While your soulmate was still trying to avoid them. Your final conversation was painful. Your soulmate said, I feel like you're pulling away. You almost laughed. Because for months, you had felt the same. You said, I am. Why? Because I'm tired. Of me? No, then, of building futures in my head with someone who keeps telling me they don't know whether I'm in theirs. Your soulmate said, I never said I don't want you. I know. Then why are you doing this? Your eyes filled. Because wanting me close and choosing a life with me are not the same thing. Your soulmate looked devastated. They said, I love you. You answered, I love you too. That made it worse. They asked, then stay. You cried. I have stayed. Pause. I've stayed through every maybe you've given me. Then, I can't keep turning your uncertainty into a promise you never made. Your soulmate had nothing to say. You left. Afterward, someone close to your soulmate started giving them a simpler version of the breakup. Their friend, Ryan. Ryan had never completely trusted long-distance relationships. When your soulmate told him you left, he said, I told you. Your soulmate frowned. Told me what? If they really loved you, they would have found a way. That sentence hurt. Ryan continued, people who love you don't just disappear. Your soulmate defended you at first. They didn't disappear. Then why aren't they here? Silence. Ryan said, exactly. Over time, that idea became comforting. Maybe you hadn't loved them deeply enough. Because if you had, you would have stayed. If you had, you would have moved closer. If you had, you would have fought harder. Your soulmate didn't know the painful irony. You had tried to move closer, you had been approved. You had apartment viewings. You were preparing to close the distance. Then their own uncertainty stopped you. 4 months. Ava kept the secret. Why? Because you asked her to. And she respected you. Then months after the breakup, you sent Ava one final message about it. You wrote, please don't ever use the transfer to make them feel guilty. Then, but if one day they start telling people I never loved them, you can show them. I can live with them believing we weren't right together. I don't want to live inside a story where my love never existed. Ava saved the message. She hoped she would never need it. Until last night. Your soulmate sat in the family room. Ryan's old words had become their own. Maybe they never loved me the way I thought they did. That's when Ava stood. Stop saying that. She brought the envelope. Transfer approval. Apartment viewings. Messages. Everything. Your soulmate read the first message. Then the next. Their eyes filled. Then they reached the final one. Your instruction to Ava, if they ever say I never loved them, show them. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a second. They looked at their sister. When did they send this? Ava told them. Months after the breakup. Your soulmate whispered, so even after everything, Ava finished, they were still trying not to make you feel guilty. Your soulmate covered their face. Their mother asked, "Why did none of us know?" Ava replied, "Because it wasn't ours to tell." Then your soulmate asked, "They were really moving here?" Ava nodded. "Yes." "They had the job?" "Yes." "An apartment?" "They were looking." "And they cancelled because of me?" Ava didn't let them simplify it. "No." Your soulmate looked up. Ava continued, "They cancelled because you couldn't tell them whether changing their life to be closer to you would actually lead to a shared life. That distinction mattered. You didn't need your soulmate to take responsibility for your career. You were capable of making your own choices. But you needed enough relationship clarity to make a huge decision intelligently." Ava continued, "They weren't asking you to guarantee marriage." "Then what were they asking?" Ava looked at them. "Whether there would be a place for them when they arrived." Your soulmate started crying. Then their mother asked, "Did you know they were considering moving?" "No." "Would it have changed your answer?" Your soulmate thought. "Months ago. They might have said yes immediately. Now they were more careful." "I don't know." Their mother looked surprised. Your soulmate continued, "But that's the problem. Then, they shouldn't have needed a secret transfer approval to make me become clear." Exactly. The proof mattered now. But it should never have been necessary then. Your soulmate said, "They asked me directly whether I wanted them closer." Ava frowned. "What did you say?" "That I didn't want them making a major decision because of me." Ava closed her eyes. "Oh." Your soulmate understood. You had given them one final opportunity without revealing the stakes. And they had told you not to build around them. Your soulmate whispered, "They thought that was my answer." Ava said, "Wasn't it?" That hurt. Because in some ways. Yes. Intent and impact were different. Your soulmate had meant, "I don't want you sacrificing yourself for me." You heard, "Don't build your life toward mine." Neither clarified. And the relationship paid for it. Your soulmate went home. Opened your conversation. Typed, "Ava showed me something tonight, you saw the message." Your stomach dropped. You already knew. Another came. The transfer, you closed your eyes. Then, "I didn't know," you replied. "You weren't supposed to," your soulmate answered. "She told me why she showed me." Pause. "Because I said maybe you never loved me." You stared at your phone. Then wrote, "Did you really believe that?" The answer took time. "I was trying to." That surprised you. Then, "It was easier than believing you loved me and still had to leave because of how I was showing up there." The truth. Your soulmate continued, "I'm sorry." You asked, "For what, specific?" They answered, "For turning your leaving into evidence that your love wasn't real, then, for forgetting how long you tried before you left, another, and for answering your questions about the future like you were asking me to guarantee something impossible." Your eyes filled. You wrote, "I was going to move, Your soulmate stared at those words. I know now. I had already started imagining where I'd live. Your soulmate's chest tightened. Then you wrote the sentence they needed to hear. But moving wasn't the proof that I loved you. They paused. You continued. I loved you before I applied. I loved you after I canceled it. Then, the transfer only proved I was willing to build something real if I knew I wasn't building alone. Your soulmate read that several times. Exactly. Sacrifice isn't the definition of love. Your job. Your city. Your life. Those things belong to you. What mattered was your intention. You asked, "Why are you contacting me?" Your soulmate replied, "Because I want to apologize, then, and because I need you to know I corrected the story with my family too." You became quiet. Another, I told them you didn't leave because you never loved me. I told them you were preparing to move closer and I gave you reasons to believe I wasn't ready to build with you. Then, I told them leaving was not the easy choice for you. Your eyes filled. That mattered. 4 months. You had wondered whether you had become the cold person in their story. Now at least the truth was being corrected. You asked, "What do you want from me now?" Your soulmate took time. Then, one conversation, another, "Not because I found proof that you loved me." Pause. "I don't want to turn your old sacrifice into a debt you have to repay with another chance." That was the right answer. You agreed. When you met, the first thing your soulmate did was slide the envelope toward you. You almost smiled sadly. "I haven't seen that in a long time." They asked, "Why did you keep all of this?" "I didn't. Ava did." You nodded. "Of course she did." Then your soulmate asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" You looked at them. "Because what would you have done?" They didn't answer. You continued, "If I told you I had already arranged to move, you would have panicked." Probably. You might have said yes because you felt responsible for what I'd already done. Your soulmate nodded slowly. "And I didn't want that." Then you said, "I needed you to want me there before you knew how much I had already prepared to come." That hurt. Your soulmate looked down. "I did want you there." You replied, "I know." Then, "But you didn't know how to tell me what wanting me there actually meant." They nodded. Fair. You continued, "I couldn't move my whole life closer to someone whose answer to the future was, 'I don't know.'" Your soulmate whispered, "You were right." You shook your head. "I wasn't asking to be right. Then, I was asking to feel safe enough to make the decision." That distinction mattered. Your soulmate asked, "What if I had known?" You thought. Maybe things would have changed. Then, maybe they wouldn't. They looked surprised. You continued, "The transfer wasn't magic. We still had communication problems. You still pulled away when things became serious. I still sometimes expected you to understand things I hadn't said clearly enough." Your soulmate nodded. Good. No rewriting the relationship as perfect. Then they said, "But I should have understood one thing." What? You were never asking me to guarantee forever. You waited. You were asking whether uprooting your life would land you beside a partner, or inside another maybe. Your eyes filled. There it was. Finally. You nodded. Yes. For a while. Neither spoke. Then your soulmate asked, "Do you still love me?" You looked at them. That isn't the first question anymore. They almost smiled sadly. I remember. You asked, "Do you?" Yes. Then, the better question is whether being with me now would cost you the peace you had to rebuild after me. You looked surprised. They had been listening. You answered, "I don't know." Your soulmate nodded. And this time, they didn't panic at the phrase. They didn't turn, "I don't know," into rejection. They said, "That's fair." That was growth. You talked for almost 2 hours. No instant reunion. No plans to move. No marriage promises. Nothing dramatic. You agreed to stay in contact. Slowly. Because if something new was going to exist, it could not be built on an old transfer letter. It had to be built on current behavior. The first test came a week later. Your soulmate received an opportunity that might eventually require relocating again. The old version of them would have decided first. Then told you. This time, they called. Something came up. You listened. They explained. Then said, "I know we're not officially building a future together right now." You waited. But you're part of my life again, and I don't want important information to arrive after I've already made every decision. That mattered. You didn't choose for them. You didn't tell them what job to take. You simply talked. Partnership wasn't control. That was what both of you had once misunderstood. Another evening. You became afraid. The old thought returned, maybe I'm investing more again. Instead of hiding it. You said, "I need to tell you something uncomfortable." Your soulmate replied, "Okay. I am scared I'm starting to hope again." Your soulmate could have given you instant reassurance. Instead, they said, "Thank you for telling me." Then, what would make this feel safer without either of us pretending we know exactly where it ends? That was a different conversation. Not perfect. But adult. And perhaps that's what changed everything. My beloved child. Your soulmate was told you never loved them. People used your leaving as proof. But last night, someone finally showed them what had been hidden. A transfer approval. Apartment plans. Messages written while you were still trying to build a future. Concrete evidence that you hadn't been looking for an escape. You had been preparing to come closer. But remember something important. You should never have to uproot your life to prove love. You should never need to make an enormous sacrifice so somebody believes your feelings were real. The transfer mattered because it corrected a false story. It did not mean your love was more valid because you were willing to move. Your words mattered too. Your patience mattered. Your attempts to communicate mattered. The fact that you stayed until staying no longer felt healthy mattered. Perhaps the strongest thing your soulmate finally understood was this: you didn't leave because you couldn't imagine a future with them, you left because you had imagined one so seriously that continuing inside uncertainty became impossible. And that is a very different truth. If this story touched your heart, comment, "I choose truth over assumptions." Not as a spell. Not to make anyone return. As a reminder. Someone leaving does not automatically mean they never loved. Sometimes people leave while still loving deeply. Because love and compatibility are not identical. Love and readiness are not identical. Love and emotional safety are not identical. Last night, your soulmate finally saw the proof. They saw how close you had been to changing your entire life. But perhaps the most important thing they learned wasn't, "They loved me enough to move." It was this: they loved me enough to build, but they finally loved themselves enough not to build alone. Now your soulmate knows the truth. What happens next won't depend on an old transfer approval. It will depend on something far more difficult. Whether two people who once loved each other can finally learn how to make real decisions together.